Good morning, good day for everyone joining us today. That you had joined us anyway. I'm pretty sure there will be more coming, but yeah, it's recorded, so we will start anyway. So today's topics, a functionality that we don't have any description on or any papers written on. So how to do a landing page hosted on the load balancer. How do you do that? And with an example. And the second topic is LoadMaster routing. So what kind of ways or priorities are there? And we will shed a bit of light into that. You are invited to ask questions. You can also use the chat and say hello. I'm trying to answer during the call. And if I don't answer everything, we will send you an email afterwards anyway with the slides and so on, and you will get the answer then. Great. Okay. Now, the topics we covered today. First of all, the update about the channel and the technical campings as usual. And then we look into our two topics, and after the webinar, you will be asked to answer a little questionnaire, and I hope of loads of you participating so we can collect those information to make those webinar broadcasts better going forward. Now, first to the updates on the channel. Today's webinar, I've already crossed it out because we're holding it. The next webinar date will be January 16th. And the topic's gonna be LoadMaster ESP with OIDC and SAML as a product or as options. So using a cloud provider. And the second topic will be logs. So what do I find where and how can I enable it? So that's gonna be the new topics for January. Also for you, for anyone partner that is interested in LoadMaster certification trainings, I have a webpage link where you can register for the two courses that are gonna happen in January. There's a recertification course on the 20th, I think. And there is a partner training course with certification 2-day course, 27, 28, if I remember right, but you will find that on the webpage. Up to 12 people can register, and I will probably this afternoon or next week add more times, so February and March and so on, so we get more stuff onto that page. I also added the links, the YouTube links to the previous discussed topics that we did before. And in January, you will find the meeting from today as a link as well. To me, for everyone that does not know me yet, my name is Renard. I'm responsible for the DACH, Benelux, and France region. For the LoadMaster product, and in the DACH region also for WhatsApp Gold and Flowmon. And I'm the guy behind those partner trainings and also behind this webinar series for the European region. My colleague Mike O'Brien, he's covering all the other regions that I didn't cover. But if one of us is in vacation, the other one covers, obviously. So if Mike is not reachable, you can, of course, come to me if you have questions. And that happens vice versa as well. It would be great if you can share with us if you have any special use cases or customer requests you need a solution for and you're not sure if the LoadMaster can do it. Let us know. We're always eager to find new use cases, how customers are using the device, and also what kind of issues customers have and like a solution for, and who knows, maybe we find a solution. So one of our topics today with a landing page resulted out of customers asking me, yeah, other products can do that. They have a web top and so on. Why can't you? And I looked into it, and voila, there's a solution which I'm going to prepare and present you today. So please let us know if you have challenges or anything you'd like to solve on the reverse proxy. We're then happy to look into it, and maybe we can assist you on that. Great. Now, I see still lots of people joined now during my little introduction. So let's get to the initial topics. Let's start with the landing page. Now, I mentioned it already. It's a function that is on the load balancer actually for ages, but no one used it that way. And it came to me because I had people migrating from F5, for example, and they wanted specifically a web top option where you get a web page showing and you can select the application you want to use. And then you might also want to restrict that by user membership. So one user with those kind of with user rights only gets certain things displayed, and someone with admin rights get other things displayed, stuff like that. So in the past, I mean, when I was still in support, in the past, I said to people, yeah, you need to host that on a web, on some web server, right? Because I didn't know any different. But there's a function on the LoadMaster to make that happen, and that's what I'm gonna show you later. Right. So again, what does the web top do? It's a simple page presenting you the resources you can choose from. You click on it and you will be sent to that resource or service. And you can customize this, of course, with logos and pictures and whatever you need. Right, so now how can we do that on the LoadMaster? There's one functionality called not available redirect handling. So this is a function I normally only use for creating HTTP to HTTPS redirects or to send an error message saying, hey, you reached the service or the subservice. So you can create a simple web page with an error code. Pretty cool for troubleshooting purposes. But there's also an option called error file. So rather than sending a white page with an error message, you could also load a simple HTML file with a maximum of 16 KB. And using that, you can create a landing page to select targets and so on. Now, I can only upload one HTML page, so I can't upload tons of pictures and stuff, but if you have a web server anyway hosted, where style sheets and stuff, whatever are there, you can just load it from there on the style sheets and so on. So from that perspective, you can still have a fancy page in 16 KB. Now, what I did here is I give you the link to those advanced properties where you find obviously this information. And now I was going to show you how that can be done. Now, let's take the LoadMaster. So this is my HA pair. And I created a virtual service, already a bit more fancy, but I'm going to go that into in a minute. So I created a virtual service. I use now two sub-VSs, one with a landing page with full access and another one with a landing page with limited access. And as you can see, there is no target server behind. And if you go into those sub-VSs, I used advanced properties and then not available handling. Obviously, there's no server behind, so nothing is available. So this feature reacts. And I put in the error code 200 and uploaded my index HTML file. And the same for the second sub-VS. Also there, I used a different web file called limited. And if we can look into that in a minute. So that means once I hit the first or the second sub-VS, I get displayed the specific page behind. Now, why did I use two sub-VSs? Very, very simple. On my main VS, I'm performing pre-authentication. I only have two user groups that are allowed. I use steering groups, so there's an extra cookie generated to tell me which group the person that logged in was member of. And as you can see here, based on the group membership, I can now say this group gets the full web page and the other group gets the limited web page. So I'm doing, based on user group, I could do a differentiation. Now, let's, I think I'm timed out already, so it should, yeah. So now let's open this. So if I go to my landing progressdemo.com, let's actually just that you see that I'm really using this. Let's give it a text. Technik Kemping 8 of November 2025. Here we go. Now let's refresh this so that I don't fool you, right? There you go. This is definitely the virtual service I just showed. And when I log in now with user rights, so limited access, so my user 1, then I go through into the second sub-VS after my LDAP has confirmed. And there you can see I have 3 applications to choose from, which is my intranet page, my extranet page, and my Exchange server. And I can, because I'm already logged in with ESP and form-based, I can use that now and don't need to authenticate again. Yeah, I probably have chosen the wrong form. And I get my single sign-on into there. So you see, LoadMaster-wise, I'm already signed in. So from that perspective, good. Now, and I can also use other applications and go in, and you see I have my authentication cookie for the pre-authentication, and I also have that group cookie. Now, if I'm coming with the administrator instead, so let's use a different browser for now. Do I have a spelling mistake? I think it was called landing. There we go. Now I can log in again. And you will see that I get through the first sub-VS with the full access. There you see there are 2 additional applications as well. So the main body of the web page is the same. It's just the admin gets 2 extra pages compared to the normal user, and there I can also continue on and open my application. I get sent there, and you also see the authentication cookie and the group I'm a member with. Nice. So yeah, that's the joy of landing pages, and it is possible to do that on the load balancer. If you want those files for this example, I mean, obviously it's just a basic file. I'm happy to share that. And we send that out in the email. Now, there's a question, Yaro, can we have access to the recordings? Of course, they will be published to YouTube. So like I showed earlier in my presentation, there will be a YouTube link for this today's recording. also insert in text for you. There we go. All right. Yes. So now that you can also see, this is pretty straightforward. Just for the feature itself, maybe we can do that. So if I disable my sub-VS here, right, then normally my VIP would be down, but as soon as I do a not available handling code, my web page actually opens, right? And I get the 200 OK code as you just saw. So this is what this feature does. And if I put in a message, Kemping EMEA November 2025, then the message is displayed. So this, as I said again, is pretty nice to troubleshoot client connections. So you know you reached the VIP, you got the handshake with the VIP done and so on. And if you do that in a sub-VS, you know you can actually reach the sub-VS, so your content rules are working and so on. So pretty cool to troubleshoot the front bit. But with that web page, it's even nicer because you can pass on the page instead. Now, do I don't see? Confused now. Where do I have put it? There we go. So you can save the error file instead and select the error file, and then you will see there's not this anymore. There's my page coming. So it's that simple to set it up. It's pretty straightforward. Okay. If there are not more questions on that, then I would continue with the next topic part. The second topic for today was LoadMaster routing. Now, first of all, we need to define two aspects, let's say it that way, because in our documentation, sometimes they say one ARM configuration, sometimes they say two ARM configuration. Now, let's define first what does that actually mean. So one ARM configuration means my clients connect to my virtual service on the same interface as my load balancer collects to the server. So that means I'm only using one interface for the entire communication. We are a reverse proxy, so it's always two connections. So one to the virtual service that you set up and we host, and the second from the LoadMaster to the destination server. So two connections. One ARM means they both happen in the same network card. Okay, so the same single network card is used. So if I'm on a hardware unit with a 1 gig interface, that means my clients come into the VIP on the 1 gig interface and my LoadMaster communicates to the server also on the 1 gig interface. So I have the potential to run into bandwidth limitations, right? Now, obviously the same here, internal LAN, a VIP hosted internally, and then I'm going to the internal resources. This is all one ARM. Now let's look into the two ARM configuration, and you see here I now have the load balancer in the middle connected to both network cards, okay? So my VIP is hosted here in the DMZ, but I'm reaching the target servers in the server network. Or the other way around, my VIP is hosted on the internal network and I'm using a different network card to go to the target server. So this is two ARM configuration. Now I just noticed a question, which is a bit longer. Give me a second to read it. Okay, I think, Luca, great question. But I think it's a bit too long right now to answer to you here in the meeting. I will get back to you on this because it takes a few more minutes to answer that, if that is okay with you. That will probably, or we might have time at the end of the webinar today, but this takes a few seconds longer. All right, but I'm pretty sure some of it we cover now in this routing part. So, okay, 2R means I'm using 2 network cards, one for the incoming traffic to the VIP and one for the traffic from the LoadMaster to the server, 2 cards. So the VIP is not in the same network as my target servers are. Now, that's just for the initial clarification. Now, there are actually 4 different, more or less 4 different routing tables on the LoadMaster, or 4 different situations you need to look into. Now, let's look into let's start with the server routing. I know it's position 3, but let's start there. So to reach a destination server, the highest priority has the static route. So if I set a static route for that server, that is the top level, right? It can even override local first, right? So if I set a static route, that has the highest priority, even if it makes no sense. If there's no static route to reach a destination server behind a VIP, I'm using obviously local first. So if I know the server on any of my interfaces I've connected, I will use that to go to that server. And if none of these 2 apply, then I'm using the global default gateway. Yeah, so this is the hierarchy on the routing performance to get to your target servers. Now let's look into the web user interface, so your management for the LoadMaster. There's also the static route, highest level. So if I have my client somewhere set in a static route to use a certain way to get to that client, that has the highest priority. After that, what I know locally, I will go through that path locally. Obviously, the LoadMaster is a Linux-based entity, so that's a proper Linux behavior. The third will be the default gateway you set in for the web user interface. You find that in certificate security, remote access, and then in line number 4, you can set an administrative gateway. I will show that in a minute in the next slide. So you can set a default gateway for the management itself. And if all of these 3 do not apply, then the load balancer will fall back to the global default gateway that you have set to one interface, right? Only one interface could have the global default gateway. And the last option here is if you have more than one interface enabled for management, which is possible, right? You can enable on top of your normal default management, you can enable alternative management addresses. For those, there's no routing possible. You need to be local in that network to go then onto that management IP. So that's why I have alternative interface is only with local access only. Okay, now, so we have covered this part and we covered the server part. Now let's look into the clients. So that's something I'm discussing with loads of my customers, and with it's actually a topic that's pretty often there. Sometimes the customer tells me, yeah, but we need to have the default gateway pointing outwards. No, not necessarily, right? You can also use the default gateway to point inwards because, as we see here, it's used for unknown server I want to connect to, which have no static route and are not locally connected. I'm using the default gateway. So it does not need to be pointing outside. Why do I say that way? You have an option to set a default gateway in your virtual service to make sure if whoever comes into my virtual service, and let's now pretend my virtual service is hosted on Ethernet 3, right? So if they comment through that virtual service, they have to get an answer through the gateway I set, which is obviously ETH3. So then I don't need to, if this is a VIP in my DMZ, right? I can put a gateway there to point then obviously outside. So for the client routing, I do not necessarily need to have the default gateway pointing outwards, right? Because I can set it in my virtual service. And I would recommend you to make it a habit to set the gateway in your virtual service anyway as a best practice. If you have only one ARM network, only one network connected, fair enough. It's not really needed because then it's all the same anyway. But as soon as you have more than one network and your VIPs could be in network A or network B, I highly recommend to enter the default gateway into each VIP. Now, there's a bit more text to this, okay? So the default gateway in the VIP obviously has priority and will be used. But the local thing, okay, we said LoadMaster is a Linux derivative. So obviously what he knows locally, he will connect locally. Because when you are local, the gateway is not needed. But we do have a function called use direct route only, DRO. It's in the miscellaneous options. I will show that in a minute. If you enable that, it's forcing the traffic. Even if I know the client on a different network card, it's forcing the traffic always to go through the default gateway inside my virtual service, despite the fact that the client might be local to another interface. So I can overrule the local first. That's why I have it set here. This obviously only applies if my use for direct route only is enabled. Then everything is forced through the gateway in the VIP and the local first is overwritten. If I don't have this enabled, then obviously this point 1 is actually point 2 because local first takes priority and then unknown traffic will be routed to the gateway in the VIP. If none of these two apply at all, then we fall back to the global gateway. Okay, and now the fourth option as the LoadMaster can be used as a gateway. Some of you might use transparency and there this happens. The routing table there is what he knows the target. If he knows it locally, he will connect through the local way. And if he does not know the location locally, he will revert back to the global default gateway. So now these are the 4 routing options and their priorities for you in a table form. Now, here you see LoadMaster access. That's what I mentioned before. When you go to certificate security remote access, in line number 4, you have admin default gateway. So this is the default gateway for your web management. You have in line 3, you select which interface you want to allow for web management, and there you set the gateway for that. So that means the global default gateway does not need to be on that interface anymore because I have my web separated, my administration for the LoadMaster separated. Now, by default, the global default gateway is always on ETH0, and that's the default setting. If you want to move it away from ETH0 to any other network, then you need to go to the miscellaneous options, network options. There you need to enable alternative gateway support. And this enabling this gives you a new functionality in your network setup. So when you go to your system configuration network setup, you find then on each of your interface the option that you can select one of the other interfaces as a default gateway. So then obviously the gateway is removed from ETH0 and then put to whatever interface you select here. That can also include bonds and VLANs and so on. To the static route part. So the static routes, again, not for the client routing. We discussed that a few slides ago. It's for your real servers you want to reach. And it's in system configuration, network setup, additional routes. And there you can set either a single machine or a full network, and you can define which gateway is used, and by defining which gateway is used, the load balancer knows what interface is used, because obviously he uses the interface pointing to that relevant gateway. Right. Now, also sometimes interesting to know what IP address is actually showing up on my real server for the client requests coming through. So there also we have two things to look at. The first thing is, what IP address does my health checks come from and arrive at the target server? And the second part is, what IP address does my production traffic arrive at the target server? Okay. Now, for the health check, it's very simple. The health check always comes from the interface of the active unit, if you have HA, of the active unit, and it's the interface IP address from that interface that is used to route to that server. So either the server is local to that interface, or that's an interface where a static route or the default gateway say that is to be used to go to that unknown server, but it's that interface IP address that's from that interface that's used to talk to the server in the first place. And this is a non-changeable fact. Health check always comes from that interface IP, no matter what. So that's not changeable. Now, let's look into the production traffic, because there obviously there are some changes. So if you select subnet originating request, by default, this is on, okay? So if that is enabled in your virtual service, then your client goes to our VIP. We use our interface, the same where the health check comes from, go to the target server, we get the answer on our interface, and we use then the VIP to communicate back to the client. Now, there is one exception to this, and the exception is if the real server is non-local. That means in a network, the load balancer is not connected in or is not present in, and we need to route to that server. Then, no matter if I click this or not, the server will see the prod traffic coming from the VIP address, which, as you can imagine, in a two-arm config, that could be pretty bad. In a one-arm config, all cool, but in a two-arm config, that might be nasty. Right. Now, let's turn subnet originating request off. Then we have exactly what I just described as an exception for non-local servers. Now here, this is now by design. The health check still comes from the interface, but my prod traffic will be presented with a VIP address towards the backend server. So as you can imagine, this does not really work well in a two-arm config. It needs to be a one-arm config for that. Right. If that is something the exception or this behavior is something you don't like and you want a different IP address showing up on the target server, there's a functionality which is normally to prevent port exhaustion, but there's a function you can also use to mask your source IP address and to dictate which source IP address is sent to the server. Now, this is actually connection scaling. So when you go to the miscellaneous options L7, you can allow connection scaling over 64K. By default, it's not on, so you need to enable it first. And then in your virtual service, in the advanced properties, you can dictate an alternative source address. That has priority over the other two options I just displayed with subnet originating request or no subnet originating request. So when you enable this, this is definitely the IP address used for the production traffic to be sent to the server. So you can force an IP or even multiple IPs. Obviously, it will use the 64K ports for the first address first, and then it goes to the second and the third, whatever many you have selected there. Right. I also mentioned transparency before. So for transparency, we are doing a half nut towards the server. So we connect still new to the server, but we pretend to be the original client. Now there are some, not limitations, but some conditions you need to fulfill in order for this to work. First is, you can imagine if the client and the server are in the same network, what will happen? You will not get the answer through the load balancer back. Instead, the server will answer the client directly. Obviously, this is asynchronic routing, and then the client will drop the packet. So not a situation you want to be in. So that's why client and backend cannot be on the same network. They need to be on different networks for this to work. Now, if they are on different networks, the target server will then use his default gateway to connect back to the client, okay? And if he does that, it will also be dropped. So the LoadMaster need to become the default gateway for that server so that the answer packet actually arrives back on the load balancer, and we can then use the VIP address to answer back to the client. So that's why those two conditions down here are actually needed. Otherwise, the traffic will not flow back and will not be accepted. So this is the magic of transparency. And we also have that in layer 4. So when you force layer 4 for your virtual service, layer 4 is the network layer that's always transparent. So then it will automatically switch transparency on and does not give you any options for subnet originating requests and so on. And they are the same limits apply, that the server and the client need to be in different networks and the load balancer need to become the gateway. All of that can be reviewed on this article. And now let's have a look into all of that in a live demo. So for that purpose, let's go back to my lab here. Good. Now, which service are we taking? Let me just use this service for now, and we disable the ESP part just to make it a bit easier. Here we go. Right. Okay. So initially, now I'm connected to my web server. I have PHP running on this, and it returns all the headers and and all the IPs that kind of talk to the server in the first place. So I can pretty much demo now who's talking, okay? So as you can see here right now, this is my load balancer 1. The second one is 12, okay? So this is LoadMaster 1 connecting to my server here. Let's have a look into the service. As you can see, subnet originating request is on. Now this is behavior as I have expected, okay? So I'm using ETH1 to go to my VIP address, but I'm using ETH0 to connect to my server. So classical 2-arm configuration. And now I have subnet originating request turned on. So I'm expecting the interface address of ETH0, which is also used for my health checks, to connect to the server. So exactly as designed, all right? Now, let's change this virtual service to a 1-arm config, all right? So I'm doing this by simply adding, where am I here? By simply adding an alternative address. Let's pretend we can also reach him on ETH0 on this address, 111. I now also get a new gateway option, you see, for my alternative address, which best practice would be to fill that out. Let's do that. So let's go HTTPS 192.168.111. No, 111. Obviously, it's certificate warning, that's to be expected. And you see, same thing applies for now. Now I'm coming in through ETH0 and I'm connecting through ETH0. It's still my LoadMaster IP. But if we now change the subnet originating request away, we are now seeing the request come on. That's a new one. My last demo, it worked fine. There we go. So you see now the request comes from my VIP address rather than from the interface IP. So, right. And now let's go a step further. Let's enable, I think I already did. So let's enable this, 64K scaling. So for me, it's already enabled. So that allows me now to select in my virtual service, here we are, to select an alternative source address. So if I dictate now a source address, so let's use 238, right? Something very odd. And I'm setting this address now. You see my option for subnet originating request is gone. I also can't change anything to transparency anymore. And when I now connect, you see I have forced this specific address to arrive at the server. Again, only for the production requests, so all the requests the clients do. My health check is still coming from the interface of the load balancer. That has not changed. Right. Great. And transparency, I think last but not least, I need to show that also. Let me do that. And static routes. Oh yeah, I need to show that too. Give me a sec, I will do. Now, first, let's do the transparency bit. Come on, sleepyhead. Now my default gateway will be changed to my HA address. Here we go. And in my service, we will take that alternative address out again. And I turn on transparency. And now obviously it only works to server to server 1 now. I never did server 2. Yeah, let's disable server 2. Here we go. There we go. So server 1 was able to respond, obviously, because he had the gateway set. So now you see my client address arriving with a request, even though I went through this VIP, right? But the client IP address is now showing up. Good, now we have that sorted. Different thing. Right now you see, let's take this as a sample. You see my health checks all working fine. The servers are connected locally, but I wanted to show you that static route issue or thing. So if I now dictate that for my server, even though I know him locally, I'm now telling my LoadMaster to use a different interface to contact him. So instead of ETH0, where the server is local, I'm now forcing him to use ETH1 instead. And you can imagine what the result is. Let's wait a few seconds. So I'm going to expect that my server 1 is going to fail all the health checks. And look at this. Dead, 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 dead. Even in Exchange, everything is dead. Okay, so that's what I mean with the static routes. You can override the local first option. I've now willingly, knowingly forced him to use the wrong interface. Obviously, he can't connect to that server using ETH1. But yeah, this has highest priority, just to confirm what I showed you in the table earlier. Cool. This is actually, if there are no more questions, which I have not seen, this is actually it for today. I give you the 15 minutes back.